What is up, Epic 7? And today we're going to be talking about the balance adjustment preview for February 13th. Basically, it's a balance patch for some characters that need some buffs, and you can see that this targeted audience is going to be for players that have these old school characters, characters that were very good in the past. For example, in the Moonlight 5 stars section, we have Fallen Cecilia and Remnant Violet. Very good characters. Maybe like 4 years ago, they were like super strong. With 5-star Covenants, we have like Lilius, Tien, Crow, and even Ludwig, 3 of 4, excluding Ludwig, which were all very meta back in the day. And we also have Ross, the main character, getting buffed as well, who was also a very powerful PvP and is still a very good PvE unit. And of course, we have 2 artifacts as well, Wings of Light and Shadow, and Uberius' Tooth. But the biggest thing are just going to be these character buffs, as you're going to see, because it'll make a lot of these characters actually playable again. And who knows, maybe after they get buffed and people test them out, they'll end up being very good. So the first unit being changed is Fallen Cecilia. Now let me just say before I talk about her changes, a lot of people are unhappy with them, saying it's not enough. But I think people are underestimating how good these changes can actually be. So the first one we have is her S1 damage is increased, which is always nice. Fallen Cecilia's damage has always been very good when you factor in her health multipliers. So because of this, she's going to hit even harder. Biggest thing though is her soul burn is for 10 souls, and your S1 will ignore effect resist. So you can actually chain lock down a soul weaver or a high effect resist character later on into the game, which can be very effective if you are just playing around a strategy where you're building souls and then locking down like a healer or something, or a dispeller, and you just burst down like an enemy carry, right? Next we have her S2. First, the barrier you give to your team and on every turn cycle is going to be stronger. And you also just get 10% max health increase. And that is going to be insane, right? Because everything scales with her health. So not only is she getting tankier with her passive, but she's actually doubling down, getting increased modifiers on her skills, and also just getting increased health. So this will be very nice. And also, if you put her on Aureus, she'll absorb more health as well, making her a lot more effective. Next, we have our S3. So our S3 is a pretty big change as well. It has a full Dispel, and also cannot trigger counterattack anymore, while still granting skill nullifier to all your allies. Damage is also going up, and because the skill soul burn is being put on her S1, of course the S3 one is gone. You're also going to see that the cooldown is just going down, so you don't have to rely on the soul burn anymore to actually, make it a low cooldown. And below that, you're going to see in very small print, probably one of the biggest buffs to her is her imprint. So before, it was effect resist to your team, which was pretty useless, honestly. This is one of the more useless imprints, unless you're running like a very specific team comp. And it's being changed to speed, which is very interesting. I think she's the first knight with a speed imprint. So you can actually use her as a speed imprint when you're cleaving. And the reason why you can do that is because you are a very tanky anchor unit. You can use her as like a cleanup unit at the end that can 1v4 after you do a ton of damage with the rest of your team. And also, she has this speed imprint. She also has an AoE attack that will dispel, and she also cannot trigger counterattacks. So honestly, like, her skill kit looks pretty good for a cleave setup, while of course you can still use her in her standard setup as well. And the speed imprint just makes it that much better for like aggressive play. So I think she's going to be a very versatile unit. There's going to be a lot of ways to play her. I'm going to definitely test her out in many different ways, but I think this buff is actually one of the bigger buffs, and I think a lot of people think it's not that big of a deal. But you have to realize, not only is she becoming better as a knight, but also she's being opened up to more aggressive play, which will be very fun. Next, we have Remnant Violet. Very short buff, but it's going to be very effective. They are basically reducing the cooldown on his S3 to 4 turns, which is a huge buff. This is just basically like a almost one shot, but they're also now giving him increased damage, and also will actually give him combat readiness now by 50%, so he cycles faster. So yeah, you're just doing a ton more damage, you're cycling quicker, your cooldown's lower. I think this is a pretty massive buff. You don't really need to buff his S2 or his S1 because they're already very standard and very strong. But his S3 getting damage buff is pretty insane because this already hits super hard and it can one-shot a lot of characters, right? Next, we have Lilius starting off the Covenant 5 stars. So basically what's being buffed is that she just gets increased critical hit chance on her passive now, which is just standard, right? They're just changing their being text from her S1 and her S3 to just putting it into her passive, which makes sense. And also, you're going to see that she will dispel all debuffs from herself when she activates her S2 passive against non-attack skills. And also you're going to see that her S3 will do increased damage against provoked characters, and will also just do more increased damage just outright. So people that like to play Lilius with like Senya on very high attack teams, because she does use the attack of the ally with the highest attack, we'll see that her S3 is going to hit a lot harder, so I think she'll be a lot better now. Basically, the exclusive equipment is being changed as well. I think they're just adding this 20% baseline into her S3, and now you have another option where you can actually get immunity to herself when you use your S2, which is the most important thing. In the past, the reason why she wasn't a good counter is because after you activate your S2, you can still get locked down, and she doesn't actually have a way to cleanse herself outside of her S2, so this immunity is going to be very, very good for her. Now we have Diane. So I think Diane's buff is actually pretty large. Let me explain why. Basically, they're switching around the S2 and S3 benefits. So in the past, the S2 was the Dispel that granted a barrier, and now it's being changed to an attack buff and barrier, and her S3 is getting the Dispel instead. So they're basically changing the Dispel and the barrier, not the Dispel and the barrier, the Dispel and the attack buff between her S2 and S3, and I think this is a huge buff because Diane is actually, or was actually a really good auto farmer for arena offense. She's probably one of the best weavers because she has cycling, she has cleansing, she has attack buff, she has defensive capabilities, and she also has healing with like some artifacts like Rod of Amaryllis, or even her own artifact. So because of that, I think she will be a lot better for just PvP arena offense. If you run her in an auto team now, she'll be very, very good. The problem was in the past is that, for example, if you had like a Harseti on the enemy team or anything that puts unbuffable, they would just use their skill on auto DN with S3, and then you're not dispelling the unbuffable, so she'll just waste her turn. So by switching this around, she'll be a lot better in auto teams, and I think that this will be very, very good. And just in all-around gameplay, it just makes way more sense to put the Dispel in her S3, because you definitely want to get up this crit resistance first, and using your S2 for the Dispel is just kind of awkward sometimes because, yeah. The S3 will give DN 50% combat readiness, so if you Dispel and then you can take your turns shortly after to give attack buff and barrier, it just makes a lot more sense. Next, we have regular Crow getting buffed. Basically, he's going to be just soaking damage that your team takes when your S3 is available, so you don't actually need Aureus anymore. You can put him on Holy Sacrifice, and he'll be a lot better. Also, you're going to see that his S3 is going to actually do, what's it called? It says decreases damage dealt and attacks all enemies. I believe this means that it's going to increase damage dealt, right? I think this is a typo. Let me see what they say here. Soulburn effect. Okay, no, it's not a typo. So, okay, actually this makes more sense. Because if you increase the damage of his S3 and attack all enemies, this would be the most broken character in the game. But I guess they're doing it so that you can actually attack everyone, but you can split the damage now. So his S3 is now becoming AoE. How much more damage it's going to do less is very, very important. If it's like 30% less damage, it's going to be insanely broken. If it's like 70%, you know, maybe it's not that good, but we're definitely going to have to see. Also, you're going to see that he'll heal after he S3s, which is super, super good. Before, you know, you got your S3 off and you kind of just died, even if with what am I trying to say? Even with this barrier, right? Because barrier isn't as good as like just flat healing sometimes. So because of this, I'm very interested to see Crow. He was already okay in Guild Wars offense. In the past, he was super, super broken and like a long time ago in the meta. But with this change, I'm sure he will be better. I just want to see how much damage his S3 can do AoE. That sounds pretty insane. Also, you're going to see that his cooldown on his S3 will go down if you run the exclusive equipment. I'm not really sure if you'd run that though. Next, we have Ludwig. So honestly, I'm not really sure what Ludwig really does, but they're making it so that you will just get CR push after Moonlight Blow. I don't even know if that's his S2 or S3. Not super certain about these changes. If you guys know if this would be good for him or not, let me know in the comments down below. I have never played Ludwig in my life, and I don't think I've ever really seen him in RTA except maybe once. Next, we have Ross and Venture Ross. They're just increasing his damage and healing. And also, you're going to see that his S2 will have an 85% chance of defense break instead of 60, so huge buff. Still not 100% for some reason. That would be very nice for PvE, but probably this would be super broken in PvP if it's 100%, right? You're just one-shotting squishies over and over. Also, you're going to see that his barrier that he procs with the rune will actually activate on your back row character when they're just put below 50%. You don't actually have to suffer a single attack anymore, which will make him a lot more flexible. Maybe eventually Ross makes a comeback with like Spectre Tenebria in the backline, and they become a menace once again, and they become very good. Next, we have some artifact changes. So these artifact changes are pretty interesting. Wings of Light and Shadow, I think this is Ilyanov's. You're going to see that it used to actually increase the damage of your next attack after you crit. Now it's just a flat damage increase, and then if you crit, you get an additional extra damage, so it makes it more reliable. Not that big of a deal. I don't think this will change too much, but Uberius Tooth is being changed pretty largely. So you're going to see that Uberius Tooth used to do additional damage according to your attack after a single attack. Now it's just any attack. So AoE warrior damage dealers that have a lot of attack will do a ton of damage. Not really sure what characters they could use this on. Maybe like Holiday Euphine will be very good with this. Actually, yeah, she'd be very good because she has burns. So because of this artifact, maybe she'll be very powerful as a damage dealer. Definitely going to test it out as well. Yeah, but there's a lot of replies and responses. A lot of people don't really like the changes, but I personally do. See, I don't really like huge buffs over the top. I'm kind of glad if you look at the targeted characters. These are all characters that are old and just needed buffs in general. And I think these buffs are actually decently sized, but let me know in the comments down below if you guys think these buffs are kind of whatever. I'm pretty excited to test out a lot of these characters because I own pretty much all of them because they're all old school characters, and they did buff a lot of the old RGB 5 stars that have always, been good in the meta in the past. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about this balance patch, and I'll see you guys in the next video.